One of our viewers sent in a request saying, please do a quick tip about texture. I know it's about values of shadows and light, still I have problems. Well, we can do that. Well, you're absolutely right. It is about lights and shadows, but it's not just about lights and shadows, how textures fall into them, but about the value relationship within the lights and shadows. Just so happens we have a complete series of full-length lessons about textures. It's series 21, Translating Textures. If you're really interested in studying textures and how to create various textures, you might check that out. Meanwhile, what about this quick tip? Well, let's give you just a little boost here. So to start out with, I just have this simple photograph. All textures work the same principle. Doesn't matter whether it's foliage or grass or hair or clothing. It doesn't matter what it is. They all work in the same principle, and that is that whatever's in shadow has to be in a close value relationship. Whatever's in light has to be in a close value relationship. And that's where a lot of people get thrown off, because often people will see textures in light and they'll make them too contrasting, or they'll see them in dark and they'll have the lighter part of the texture just too light. So it's about controlling value relationship within the light field or the shadow field. Now, I'll just give you just a brief little demonstration here to show you what I'm talking about. So if I just take just a section of this photograph right here, say just take this section right here, and I'll just sort of throw a little bit of a diagram in here, where there is a section right in here that is, or the section right in here that is in shadow, and then the section underneath it, this section right in here is in shadow, and the section underneath it is not in shadow. And so what you would do first of all is to do a little bit of this. I find very helpful. Is to do a little bit of a separation. I call it a no-tan study. It is a no-tan of where is the shadow. Because if you can determine where the shadow is, or what parts are being falling into shadow, then that goes a long way to helping you know what to do with it. And so what I do is take, and you've seen me do this before probably on other quick tips, and certainly you know I build all my video lessons by beginning with this shadow, not in shadow separation. So what I would do here, I'm taking this right here and I'm saying, okay, all this is in shadow. And so knowing that all of that is in shadow, what I'll do then is I'll just indicate just in a single value. This is just a note, it's note taking. I'm saying to myself, all this is in shadow. And I'll just kind of let that fizzle out into sort of a little vignette. Right in there. All this is in shadow. And then I'll find a little bit of not in shadow right in there. And then I'll find that underneath that, all this is in shadow. And so right in there. And then I'll find another area that's not in shadow. That is not in shadow. All of this is in shadow. And I keep building like that, where I have indicated here on the canvas before I ever begin what is in shadow, what is not in shadow. Now once that's done, I can go into the shadow areas and I can start in where I think where the deep shadow areas are. And this is where the whole texture thing comes in. So within the shadow areas, I'm limited to 5 values, you might say. Might say I'm limited from value 10 to value 5. If I make in that shadow area the part that belongs, the bushes themselves, not anything that might be sticking out in front of them, but the part that forms the bushes themselves, or the part that forms the fabric, or the part that forms the hair, whatever. If I make that texture, any part of that texture, any lighter than value 5, it's going to go out of whack. So I got to look at the value relationship. Now I like to set my palette up in a value line so that I already have built in here what I can call the in shadow side and the not in shadow side. So what I would do there then to create that texture, I could start out, let's say right in here, this is this is the deeper part of the shadow, and I just used the brush stroke there that indicates that the deeper part of the shadow, and this is deeper part of the shadow right in here. And then I would come up into the next value up, and this is where the texture starts forming. Then I can begin to throw that next value up right in here, and that begins to show a contrast that shows me texture in shadow. Now you'll notice that in very, very deep shadow, you don't see the texture really pronounced. If you look all right in here, you know it's leaves, you know it's the texture of leaves, but you don't see it that pronounced because you have that close value relationship. Now I might go back into the very dark color here and emphasize the depth of the shadow. You see, now I'm beginning to see texture because I have that close value relationship within that in shadow area. Now in the not in shadow area, I would do the same thing. And I always say not in shadow, indicating areas being hit by light, or we might say the halftone areas. For some people that might be meaningless. But in there, the low light areas are going to be about in that value 5 to 4.5 range. Value 5 is kind of the cutoff. Now what happens with in the halftone areas, or those not in shadow, especially with everything in fact, is that people will, we always find in there the textures are created because tiny little lights, tiny little shadows are falling in. Like right in here, for example, we see tiny little shadows because they're clusters of things. Each one of them has its own little light-shadow relationship. And what happens is people will make the dark portion of that too dark. Now there's a little rule of thumb that you can follow. It may vary sometimes, but the dark in the lighter part, the dark that's being hit by light, should never be any darker than the light that's being hit by dark. Now what I mean by that, if you come into the shadow areas, that lightest area in the shadow areas is a good value. No value any darker than that would belong in the not in shadow areas. And if you can remember that little principle, it really works to help you communicate that. So let's try that out. Here would be the light. Well, let's see. Let's just actually use some of that. I'll go in here and within that little contrast I just made there, let's throw some more texture in that shadow area. Show you how that works right there. And we can maybe put a little bit of that texture right next in here as it moves into the not in shadow area. Now, I can throw in the not in shadow area the same value. Just throw it in right here, like that. Then I can begin to raise that value into halftones, and you see the texture beginning to come out. I go into one value up. In this case, I went to just it's about just one value lighter to help build those halftones that are in light, not in shadow. And then I can even, within that, the lighter halftones, build it even lighter. And I think you begin to see. Now to make that be a little bit more visible, I'll come back in here into this in shadow area and throw on the shadow side. This is the dark. This is my in shadow area color that sits behind that. So if it's in shadow, it's going to fall into that dark value 5 or darker. If it's not in shadow, it's going to fall value 5-ish on the light side of value 5 or lighter. And so if you can keep that value relationship, and I'll repeat it, if you keep that value relationship of creating those textures, whatever shape they are, whether it's grass, whether it's foliage, whether it's fabric, doesn't matter what it is, it can be sure those values are close in relationship, no broader than 5 to 10 or 5 to 1, then you'll see that you'll be able to create those textures within the light areas and within the shadow areas, and actually they'll be right. It doesn't matter what medium, it works in all medium. Colored pencil, watercolor, oil, acrylic, pastel. It doesn't matter what, the medium doesn't matter at all. The principle works the same, and you can actually see that. You can observe that when you go looking for it in the various subjects that you look at. So, if you found this helpful, first of all, you might check out that Series 21 on our site, dianemize.com, and see if any of those titles might relate to you as being helpful in helping you to understand how to translate textures. So you might check out other titles on that site too, because we have the full-length lessons there, and you might find some that you would relate to. And there's your quick tip.